Hi everybody, let's talk a little bit about Brutus No. 1. Now, of course, Brutus is an anti-federalist, so he is opposed to the new constitution. He's opposed to creating one large republic, and he wants to keep it the way it has been, where the states are the central focus of the national government. Of course, the Federalists in the Federalist Papers are writing about why they believe that New York should ratify the new Constitution, and you have here the opposite of that. Brutus No. 1, probably the most famous of what Brutus, under that pen name, writes, generally concerned with the Constitution. So let's get into it. So what Brutus talks about here at the beginning is that there are many instances that can be produced by which the people have voluntarily increased the power of their rulers, but few, if any, in which rulers are willingly abridged their authority. In other words, there are lots of historical examples where rulers have gotten more power, lots and lots of power, where the people have allowed them to take that power, and then, well, they've continued on, right? They've continued to grab more power. You can think of people like Genghis Khan, I guess, historically, creating an empire in Central Asia through Eastern Europe. You can think of Attila the Hun conquering Central and Eastern Europe. You can think of Julius Caesar and creating the Roman Empire. Not just about the physical land conquest, but also getting more and more power. Incidentally, you think about Caesar, and you think about who killed Caesar and all of his power. Well, might be Brutus, huh? Yeah, that's where that comes from. And so we continue on. But we start with this idea where Brutus says, hey, why would we go and give more power when historically we know that when governments get more power, they take an exponential amount of power from there. And so he says that, or these anti-federalists say, this government is to possess absolute and uncontrollable power, legislative, executive, and judicial, with respect to every object to which it extends. So he's saying that when you in the Constitution create this national government, you're giving it all of this power, so much so that it will be absolute at the national level. Not only absolute, but also uncontrollable. That's the claim that he makes, and he goes on to support that claim. It's like he's in your English class, right? He goes on to support that CER by saying, look at the necessary and proper clause. Look at the supremacy clause. You're creating a national government that has a legislative, an executive, and a judicial that will be uncontrollable and have absolute power. So let's talk about the necessary and proper clause first. He says in Article 1, Section 8, essentially, that the Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying out into execution the foregoing powers. And so he points that out. The necessary and proper clause, and we know that the necessary and proper clause ultimately expands the power of the national government. Not necessarily the power of the Congress as an institution, but it creates a situation where the Congress can pass the laws that allow the national government to have more power over time. It's a subtle but important distinction. And then he refers a little bit farther down to under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. And so he's talking about the supremacy clause. In other words, when there's conflict between our 13 states or one of the 13 states and the national government, the Constitution says that the national government will be supreme. Now think about how different that is as a concept when you're thinking about what they're used to, right? What they're used to as a way of doing government under the Articles of Confederation. It's a completely different way of looking at what government should do. The national government then, or the government, he says, I put in national. The national government then, so far as it extends, is a complete one and not a confederation. So they make the states here, he says, powerless in any area where the national government has power. That is the supremacy clause. When he looks at the necessary and proper clause, he says, is this essentially a blank check? Can Congress do whatever it wants? In that case, if you think about it in relation to Federalist number 10, which is about factions, could any faction then get control of the national government and do what it wants on a national scale and not be able to be curtailed because it's now uncontrollable, not be able to be curtailed by the states or anybody else, like the people themselves? So he says this is a bad thing. This is a bad thing for the states. It's a bad thing for the people. And it's a bad way to run a national government. He goes on to talk about making the 13 states into one nation, where he says, let us now proceed to inquire, as I first proposed, whether it be best the 13 United States should be reduced to one great republic or not. It is here taken for granted that all agree in this, that whatever government we adopt, it ought to be a free one. And he goes on from there. But then he asks the question, then will be whether a government thus constituted and founded on such principles is practicable and can be exercised over the whole United States, reduced into one state. And so he says, can we have a free republic if those 13 states are reduced into one government? And of course, he thinks it's a bad idea. He continues on, if respect is to be paid to the opinion of the greatest and wisest men who ever thought or wrote on the science of government, well, guess what? He's going to tell us they think this is a bad idea. He quotes Montesquieu. It is natural to a republic to have only a small territory. In a large republic, there are men of large fortunes. So we want small republics. We want men of small fortunes. They'll be less greedy. They'll be less acquisitive. They'll be less likely to go out and try to use the government to take for themselves, as opposed to doing for the public good. In a large republic, he continues on, individuals may be happy, great, and glorious by oppressing their fellow citizens. So they look at it and they go, hey, maybe now that I have all this power, I should oppress some people. In a large republic, the public good is sacrificed to 1,000 views. So he's given reason after reason. And he says this is going to make government out of the reach of the common and ordinary citizen. And so since it's about a vast republic, a large republic versus a small republic, he says big republic going to be bad. Big republic is going to be bad for the people. It's going to be bad for individual freedom. It's going to be bad in terms of criminality and the level of corrupt individuals involved here. It's going to be bad in terms of representation. It's going to be bad because we have all of these people. It's going to be bad because we have all of this land that we have to govern, and it's just too vast of a situation. So he says it's not practical with so many people in such a large country that we can elect people who will speak for everybody or who will conduct government fairly and in a way that you want them to help you. He goes on to say, makes this claim, in a republic, the manners, sentiments, and interests of the people should be similar. If this be not the case, there will be a constant clashing of opinions, and the representatives of one part will be continually striving against those of the other. In other words, a large republic means we have all this diversity of opinion, and we're not ever going to get anything done because everybody's going to always disagree. Now think about how that conflicts with what Madison was saying in Federalist number 10. Madison's saying we need a large republic so we can have many, many more factions and they can all compete with each other. Here, Brutus is saying that we should have small republics so people can, have similar ideas. Like the guy who lives down the street from you has the same ideas as the woman who lives down the street from him, and you all sort of kind of have an idea of what you want. But somebody who lives 4, 5, 6 states away from you is going to have different ideas. He says we can never get anything done if we do it that way. So we should have a small republic. He continues on to say that diversity of opinion will lead to too much contention and we won't get anything done. He says that we have so many different ideas, so many different people, so much land, and people spread out so much that we won't be able to attend to all the concerns of all the different people. And he says ultimately, because it's not local, because it's not near us, it's not close to us, government won't be able to be controlled by the people. But ultimately, when we look at the two big things that Brutus No is talking about, we're looking at two things. One, a big republic is bad, right? One country is worse than 13 separate republics because of the idea that it's too spread out. We can't take care of everybody. We'll have too much contention because they won't do government in a way that will please everybody. Big, bad, distant government is going to be a bad way to do government. Close, near to each other, right here at home, we'll be able to take control of the government. If the government tries to take too much power, we'll stop it because it's right here next to us. Those are the arguments where he says big republic bad, 13 small republics better. Let's keep things the way they are. Let's not ratify the Constitution. But then he also adds this idea that the necessary and proper clause, the supremacy clause, and the introduction of a judiciary are bad because it's essentially, if all the other stuff isn't bad enough that it's such a large republic, it essentially says that through the necessary and proper clause, you can pass anything you want. So there are no restrictions. And the next thing is you have a supremacy clause, which says the national government is supreme, not the states any longer. It's the national government. And we have a judicial branch that is going to interpret the law as it sees fit. All of these things together within the structure, not just the vastness and the largeness of it, but within the structure of the governing document itself, creating the governmental system. You're going to give so much power to that large national government that it is a bad position for us to put ourselves in. So New Yorkers and everybody else, don't ratify this Constitution. That's the argument that he's making in Brutus No. 1.